People say I'm the prototype of Sun Wukong, but in all honesty, I don't possess even a fraction of his divine powers. I have no wish-fulfilling golden cudgel that can grow or shrink at will, let alone master his 72 transformations. I'm just an ordinary golden snub-nosed monkey deep in the Qinling Mountains, huddling in my thin fur, counting the days as I struggle through the endless bitter winter. This is my second winter in these mountains. I remember last year at this time, the frost flowers on the branches only waited until the north wind pierced through everything before the mountain hollows finally froze over. But this year, the snow and wind came as if someone was herding them to a market their pace much earlier and far fiercer than in previous years. Last night, the snow fell silently, yet by dawn, it had covered the entire mountain. Even the thickest fir trunks were wrapped in a heavy blanket of white. When the wind blew, snow cascaded down from the branches, landing on me with a bone-chilling cold. I huddled under a snow-dusted rock, gazing at the vast white forest in the distance, my stomach growling emptily. But this year's snow was too heavy, burying everything beneath it. Earlier, I followed the troop as we scraped through the snow for ages, only to find a tiny handful of rock-hard moss. I stuffed it into my mouth. It was astringent and bitter, not nearly enough to fill my stomach. Just then, a soft call came from above. The elderly matriarch of the troop held out half a piece of tree bark she had clutched in her paw. The sugar hidden inside fir bark is our lifeline. The wind picked up again. I looked up at the sky. Pale gray clouds hung low, a sign that the snow would continue for a while longer. The adult monkeys huddled tightly together, surrounding us young ones in the center, using their warm bodies to shield us from the wind and snow. Their fur was soaked by the snow, clumping into icy tufts, yet none of them moved an inch. I snuggled deeper into my mother's embrace. She gently groomed the snow matted down on my back with her front paws, her own body trembling slightly, not from fear, but from the cold. The temperature had long dropped below -10 degrees Celsius. Even our breath turned to white mist the moment we exhaled. The snow reached our calves, and every step required great effort. A commotion erupted from the trees in the distance. My father was returning with a few young male monkeys. Their faces were stained with blood, their paws bright red from the cold. It was clear they had traveled farther to search for food. But from their empty paws, I knew this trip had been another fruitless one. Father stood on a weathered rock, his fluffy tail held high, as if sending a signal to the troop. Even through the blurring snow, I could see his straight back, like a golden red javelin planted firmly in the snow. He turned his head, his gaze sweeping over every member of the troop, finally resting on us young ones. There was no weariness in his eyes, only a determination I couldn't yet understand. I suddenly thought of the stories about Sun Wukong I'd heard of beyond the mountains, how he could somersault 100,000 miles in a single leap, how he could summon immortals to his aid. But we have no such powers. When hardship comes, all we can rely on is each other, only these paws, calloused from scraping through ice and snow, and our stubborn refusal to bow to the winter. As I watched Father turn and step back into the blizzard, the young males immediately followed. Their figures were soon swallowed by the white snow mist, leaving only a trail of uneven footprints, stark against the snow. I knew the days ahead would only get harder, but as long as Father led the way, and as long as every member of the troop stayed close together, we would survive. When the blizzard swept over the Qinling mountain ridges, Father was always the first to tread through the snow. His golden fur looked like a dancing flame in the white, his fluffy tail held high like an unyielding flag. We walked in the footprints he left, watching his upright back push through the oncoming blizzard again and again. Suddenly, I understood what people beyond the mountains meant by backbone. It wasn't about the hardness of bones, but the resolve that no amount of heavy snow and wind can bend. Every time we stopped to rest, he never joined the warm huddle of the troop. Yesterday, Father brought back a small handful of tree gum. He only licked the crumbs stuck in his paw crevices, pushing the larger pieces to the pregnant females. This morning, I saw his paw was bleeding. He'd scraped it while peeling bark, the cold turning the blood to tiny droplets that fell on the snow like a cluster of small red flowers. He pushed the cleanest piece of bark toward me, the warmth of his palm making my tongue tingle. When the wind blew, his tail lifted a little slower than usual, yet his silhouette still stood as steady as a stake planted in the snow. I quietly followed behind him, learning to step into the snow hollows he'd made. When he turned to look at me, the light in his eyes was brighter than the snow. Maybe when I grow a little more, I can also stand on that tallest branch for him, letting the blizzard know that the golden red flames in these mountains have never burned alone. The shadow of the fir tree had just been stretched long by the morning light when a strange, fishy scent suddenly drifted into the air. Father's tail shot upright, his golden red fur standing on end. That was the troop's most urgent warning signal. I followed his gaze to the mountain ridge, where several gray-black shadows appeared one after another, like dark clouds blown in by the wind. These uninvited guests drew closer, their emaciated bodies covered in matted fur. Suddenly, Father let out a sharp, short hiss, like a stone thrown into a calm lake. The young males immediately formed a semicircle, their backs arched like drawn bows. The females picked up their young and fled into the depths of the forest. The elderly matriarch pulled my tail, dragging me deeper into the crevice of the rock. When I looked back, I saw Father leap onto the thickest horizontal branch, his fluffy tail taut like a straight line in the wind. The leader of the stranger monkeys pounced first, the wind from its sharp claws stinging my face. Father didn't dodge, he charged straight at it. The two figures tumbled together among the branches, their golden red and gray-black fur exploding in the air like two tangled flames. I watched as Father, pinned beneath the stranger, suddenly bent his hind legs and kicked hard. The foreign monkey king screamed and fell into the snow. But before Father could steady himself, 3 of the strangers had already charged at the young male's defense line. The fattest one bit Ollie's hind leg. Ollie howled in pain, yet stood firm, guarding the gap behind him where the females were retreating. Father didn't move, still standing on that horizontal branch. Only then did I notice his tail hanging behind him, half of its fur soaked in blood, like a red-dyed silk ribbon. Ollie tried to jump up to lick his wound, but Father pushed him away with a front paw. The wind swirled the blood mist around him, revealing the crushed bark beneath his feet, the little food we managed to find that day. Father glanced down at it, then looked up toward the direction where the strangers had fled. His tail hung limp, yet his back stood straighter than before. Suddenly, I understood. In that fight, he hadn't just protected a few pieces of bark. When he knocked the foreign monkey king off the branch, when he let his tail get injured just to bite the other's ear, he was telling all living things that this forest, this troop of golden red creatures, was not to be bullied. The dark red trail of blood in the snow hadn't yet frozen solid, and Father still stood on the branch. As the wind lifted his blood-stained fur, I suddenly caught sight of a few strands of dazzling silver. The winter sun filtered through the cold air, casting fragmented light on his golden red back. Last night, when he'd groomed his fur, I'd thought those silver strands were just frost dusted down. But now, looking closer, I saw they were firmly rooted at the base of his fur, like vines quietly climbing up pine resin. It turned out that every morning he stood firm against the blizzard, every moment he fought off intruders, white hairs were quietly growing. Your father always used to be the first to climb the highest branches, the elderly matriarch said, her paw brushing my back, her palm rough from years of handling bark. Now he squats there longer and longer. It's not that he's not tired, he's afraid that if he lies down even for a moment, the sky will collapse on us. I thought of his lonely vigil last night, the moonlight fixing his shadow to the snow like a silent reef. Back then, I'd thought that was just what a leader should do. It wasn't until I saw the dried blood on his tail that I realized that straight backbone of his was propped up by countless sleepless nights. This morning, when we shared the bark, Father moved a little slower. The force with which he pressed his paw against the bark was lighter than last year. The wood shavings that fell mixed with a few shed claw fragments. When he pushed the sweetest part of the tree core toward me, I suddenly noticed his paw pads were covered in cracks, like a dried-up riverbed scars from years of scraping ice and climbing rough branches. When a howl from the retreating strangers came from afar, Father's head snapped up, his tail tensing instinctively, yet it lifted a fraction slower than before. That arc, once as firm as a flag, now held a barely noticeable weariness. Suddenly, I understood why the elders always gave him the warmest rock crevice when he rested. The height of a leader, it turned out, meant taking all the bitter wind onto one's own shoulders. When the afternoon sun slanted down, I quietly fetched a clump of dry moss and placed it on the branch where he often sat. When Father looked down at me, his eyes were as soft as the mountain streams when spring snow melts. For once, he didn't push me away, he just gently touched my forehead with his uninjured paw. As the wind blew, I tried to straighten my back like him, keeping my tail balanced behind me. My fur wasn't fully grown yet, and my claws weren't sharp enough, but standing beside him, I suddenly felt that golden red silhouette was no longer alone. Perhaps that's what growing up is. One day you're still clinging to the warmth of your mother's embrace, and the next morning you wake up, suddenly wanting to shield those who protect you from the storm. I began to follow the young males to practice climbing, stepping awkwardly in father's footprints through the snow, even secretly mimicking the strength he used to scrape bark. The scabs on father's tail formed and fell off again, and the new fur growing in was a faint pink, while the down on the back of my neck gradually took on a golden hue. Now, when he looks into the distance, I stand where I can block the wind for him, letting him know that soon, there will be another backbone to stand beside his, supporting the troop. The blizzards in these mountains will never stop, but some things last longer than snow and wind. What father has passed on to me isn't just the skill of scraping bark, it's the courage to stand as a shield for one's companions, even in the darkest of straits. The snow began to fall again, landing on father's blood-stained tail and melting into tiny droplets. He bent his head to gnaw on a piece of bark, his focus as if he were chewing not just dry fiber, but the entire forest's spring and autumn. I once thought all we cared about was filling our bellies until I saw the elderly matriarch push the last half-handful of moss into the mouth of a dying young monkey, then curl up in the snow and never wake up. Only then did I realize that the bark we gnawed on contained something heavier than sustenance. This morning, when we shared food, Ollie pushed all the moss he'd found to a mother monkey with her young, while he himself licked at ice shards in a daze. He'd lost his only child last year, yet he understood better than anyone that the troops' bellies must hold the hope of tomorrow. When the wind passes through the fir forest, it always carries an ancient howl. Father says it's the voices of our ancestors, reminding us why we guard this barren mountain. Last spring, I saw migratory birds stopping on the branches. They said there were warmer forests beyond the mountains, yet none of us wanted to leave. It's not that we can't leave, it's that we can't bear to. We can't bear to leave the marks of our ancestors' claws on every tree root, can't bear to leave those crisscrossing footprints in the snow, and most of all, can't bear to let this forest fall completely silent. Last night, as the elderly matriarch lay dying, a hoarse whimper rumbled in her throat. Her paw pointed to the cliff wall, where there was a rock eroded by wind and rain, covered in deep and shallow scratches, claw marks left by generations of monkey kings. The deepest one was made by father last year. The matriarch said these marks would tell future creatures that once, a troop of golden red monkeys counted 1,000 snowfalls here. We never hoard food in our nests. It's not that we lack foresight, it's that we know life itself is the most precious treasure. Father often says, moss will wither, bark will rot, but as long as the troop leaves footprints in the snow, we will always have a place in the Qinling Mountains. This morning, while practicing climbing, I carved my own claw mark on the tallest branch. The faint scratch glimmered in the sunlight, as if saying to the forest, "Look, I am here." No one has ever waited for a miracle. When the strangers approach again, all we can rely on is the overlapping shadows of one another. Mothers shield their young under their bellies, young males stand shoulder to shoulder like a wall. Father's tail no longer stands high, yet it remains as steady as a needle that calms the sea. We all know the winter won't shorten because of prayers, but as long as our feet can still step into the snow, we must move forward even if it's just one small step. In the lull between winds, I heard the crisp sound of a stream thawing in the distance. Father suddenly looked up toward the valley, his golden red fur glowing warmly in the setting sun. His tail brushed gently against my back, as if passing on an ancient promise. Maybe when the Chinese tune buds sprout, we'll forget how much bark we chewed this winter, how much blood we shed. But we will never forget that in this silent forest, there once were creatures who refused to bow their heads, who bit through ice and snow with their teeth, and wrote their stubbornness in claw marks. When future generations see the layers of claw marks on the cliff wall, they will hear our voices carried in the wind. We came. We lived. And we will keep on living.